The first time Eden Hall stole something, it was a lipstick. The last time, it cost her everything. It started like most stories of heartbreak do, with charm, with attention, with a man who knew how to look you in the eye and make you feel seen. Eden Hall was 22 and working 2 part-time jobs in Dayton, Ohio, trying to make rent and put herself through night classes. She was smart, practical, and quiet, the kind of girl who didn't make waves but knew how to swim against the current. She dreamed of something better than her cluttered studio apartment and a life spent clocking in and out. That dream began to feel real the day she met Mason Reed. Mason was older by a few years and carried himself like a man who'd seen things, confident, sharp-dressed, smooth-talking. He wasn't local, and he liked to keep it that way, claiming he traveled for consulting jobs that always seemed vague. But Eden didn't ask many questions. Not at first. They met at a corner bar where she was bartending weekends. He ordered whiskey neat and tipped in crisp 20s. By his second visit, he was flirting. By the third, he had her number. Within a month, she was falling hard. Mason had a way of making her feel important, like she mattered in a world that usually passed her by. He brought her small gifts, took her to restaurants she'd never dared to enter before, whispered about how they were meant for more than the life they were living. And she believed him. She didn't even notice the shift at first, the way Mason started testing her boundaries. "Hey babe," he'd say casually, "you mind returning this phone? I don't have the receipt." Or, "Can you grab this package for me from the locker? It's under a different name." They were small things. Harmless things. She didn't question them. Then came the money drops. Driving envelopes across town. Signing for packages under aliases. A little more suspicious, but Mason always had an excuse. Gray areas, he'd call them. Nothing serious. Eden told herself it wasn't illegal. Not really. And even if it was, it wasn't her that was doing anything wrong. She was just helping the man she loved. But love, Eden would learn, has a price. The turning point came one cold October evening. Mason was tense, not his usual charming self. He said he needed her to do one last favor. A quick pickup. She'd meet someone in a parking lot, exchange envelopes, then leave. Easy. He kissed her cheek, told her he'd be waiting at their place when she got back. But when Eden arrived at the parking lot, everything unraveled. Within seconds, police swarmed. Guns drawn. Commands shouted. She froze, hands up, the envelope still in her lap. Inside it? Bank account details, wire fraud paperwork, burner phones. Mason was nowhere to be seen. At the precinct, Eden begged for answers. She told them about Mason, swore she didn't know what was inside the envelope. But the name Mason Reed didn't come up in any of their systems. No ID. No address. No digital footprint. As far as they were concerned, he didn't exist. She was pregnant and didn't know it yet. Her charges? Conspiracy to commit fraud, mail fraud, identity theft. Bail was denied. She was painted as the central figure in an ongoing scam. When the test came back positive in county lockup, she cried alone in her cell. Then came the letter, postmarked from out of state. Inside, Mason's handwriting curled across the page like smoke. "You're stronger than you think. I couldn't wait around. I had to protect myself. Don't hate me. By the way, Claire and I are engaged now. You remember Claire, right? She always had a soft spot for me. Claire. Their mutual friend. The one Eden had trusted. And with that, Eden Hall was left with nothing but prison walls, a growing belly, and the knowledge that she had been used, discarded, and replaced. But this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Prison strips you of everything, your clothes, your time, your name. Eden Hall quickly learned that inside the walls of Dayton Correctional Institution, she wasn't a young woman with ambition or pain. She was just inmate number 402118. And she was 5 months pregnant. By the time she was transferred from county to state, the weight of betrayal had sunk deep into her bones. Mason was gone. Claire was living in the apartment Eden used to share with him. She knew because Claire had posted pictures, smiling on their old couch, hand resting gently on her stomach in one shot. Yes. Claire was pregnant too. But Eden was alone. Prison is a machine, and Eden learned how to move through it, quiet, careful, unremarkable. She read every book in the small library, took every course offered, and signed up for work in the laundry unit. Her belly grew as winter arrived, and with each passing day, her resolve solidified. She wasn't going to fall apart. Not for Mason. Not for Claire. Not even for the child she would soon have to surrender. The day her son was born was cold, gray, and silent. No family. No hand to hold. She gave birth in a sterile hospital ward guarded by 2 correctional officers who barely glanced at her face. She named the boy Noah, because it meant rest, something she hadn't known in months. She held him for 3 hours. Then he was gone. The state had arranged temporary custody with her estranged great-aunt June, an elderly woman who Eden hadn't seen in years. It was better than foster care, they told her. At least he'd be with blood. Back inside the walls, Eden returned to her routines. The pain didn't disappear. It became something else, something cold, sharp, and focused. She started writing letters. To June. To Noah. She received short updates in return. June wasn't affectionate, but she was reliable. The baby was healthy. He had a quiet temperament. He liked being swaddled tight. Eden began saving every cent she made in the prison job programs. Sewing. Mopping. Filing. She spent none of it. Not on snacks. Not on calls. She lived lean and planned long. Her GED? Completed in 6 months. Then came college credits through a local re-entry program. She chose psychology, not for healing, but for understanding. She wanted to know how people like Mason thought. How they manipulated. How they built illusions. Every day, she thought about revenge. Not loud. Not messy. Quiet. Clean. Inevitable. She started tracking time. 5 years. 4. Then 3. And then, a postcard arrived in the mailroom, no return address. Just a photo of a white picket fence and a baby stroller in the yard. On the back, in that familiar curl of Mason's handwriting. We named her Lily. Thought you'd want to know. Eden smiled as she folded the postcard and slid it into her journal. Not because it didn't hurt. But because it reminded her why she was still standing. Mason Reed thought he was untouchable. Claire Simmons thought betrayal came without consequence. They were wrong. When Eden finally stepped outside those prison gates 7 years after the day she was arrested, she wasn't the girl who had fallen for a charming con man. She was something much, much colder. And her next move had already begun. The sky looked different outside. Eden Hall stood at the edge of the prison gate, clutching a small plastic bag, 2 prison-issued outfits, a state ID, and a check for $97.42. It was barely enough to buy a bus ticket and a meal, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to start over. She was here to finish what had started. Her first stop was the small, quiet home of June Hall, her great-aunt, now in her late 70s, and the sole guardian of her son. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, rows of modest houses, small porches with wind chimes, faded flower beds still clinging to life. June answered the door in a robe and slippers, her silver hair pinned back. "Well," she said, eyeing Eden up and down, "You're taller than I remember." Inside, Eden was introduced to Noah, now 6 years old, with the same stormy gray eyes as his mother. He was shy at first, hiding behind June's legs, but Eden didn't push. She knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said softly, "I've waited my whole life to meet you." He didn't answer. But he didn't look away. It was a start. June was no nonsense, but fair. She agreed to let Eden stay in the small spare room, under the condition she followed the parole rules and didn't disrupt Noah's life. Eden accepted without argument. She had bigger plans than disruption. At night, while June slept and Noah snored gently down the hall, Eden pulled out a notebook, already filled with dates, maps, addresses, and names she'd collected during her sentence. Mason Reed and Claire Simmons had moved to Indianapolis. He ran a car leasing business now, Reed Executive Rentals, clean on paper, but Eden knew how easily Mason turned gray into green. Claire worked from home as a virtual interior designer. They had a daughter, Lily, age 5. Private daycare. Upscale neighborhood. A brick house with solar panels and security cameras. But Eden watched. For weeks, she posed as a rideshare driver in their neighborhood. Parked near their home. Logged their patterns. Mason left for work at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Claire dropped Lily at daycare by 9 o'clock. Thursdays, Claire went to yoga at a studio downtown. Sundays were family days, brunch, grocery run, park. Every move was written down. One evening, parked across the street in a borrowed car, Eden sipped gas station coffee and whispered, "You should have let me rot in peace, Mason. But you had to send that postcard." She didn't plan to kill them. That was never the goal. She planned to ruin their sense of safety, permanently. To do that, she needed leverage. Someone who hated Mason more than she did. Enter Callum Bright, a former associate of Mason's who had once been a collector, enforcer, fixer. The kind of man who wasn't found in polite company. Eden had learned about him from a cellmate who'd run cons with Mason years earlier. According to the story, Mason had stiffed Callum on a job and disappeared before the heat came down. Callum had been looking for him ever since. Eden tracked him down at a grimy auto shop outside Columbus. It took her 2 weeks and a fake name to arrange a meeting. He was older now, scarred, eyes sunken, but his hands were still thick and dangerous. "You got a reason to drag me back into this?" he asked, arms crossed. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, addresses. Routines. Bank statements. Photos. Vulnerabilities. "That's the man who cost you 50 grand and a year in county. He's living under a new name with a new wife. Thought you'd want to know." Callum flipped through the file. His expression never changed. "What's in it for you?" "Peace," Eden replied. He stared at her. "You don't want to be around when this happens." "I won't be." And just like that, the wheels of revenge began to turn. Eden went back to Dayton. Tucked Noah in every night. Made his breakfast. Took him to the park. Played the part of a woman grateful to be free, grateful to be forgiven. But every morning, she checked the news. And waited. It happened on a Thursday. Eden was sitting on the porch of June's house, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. The morning was unusually quiet. A faint breeze stirred the wind chimes overhead. Noah had already left for school, his backpack bouncing against his back as he ran to catch the bus. The silence broke with a buzz from her phone. It was a local Indianapolis news alert, the kind she had signed up for months ago and checked religiously every day. Breaking: couple found dead in violent home invasion in Lawrence Township. Authorities investigating. She didn't react right away. She simply tapped the screen, opened the article, and began to read. Lawrence Township Police have confirmed a double homicide occurred early this morning at a home on Pine Valley Drive. The victims, identified as Mason Reed and Claire Simmons, were discovered by a neighbor who noticed the front door ajar and called authorities. Their 5-year-old daughter was found unharmed in her bedroom. Eden stared at the words, blinking once. Noah's voice echoed faintly in her memory, laughter from the night before, the way he had proudly shown her his spelling test, the way he hugged her like he meant it. She exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady. That evening, the local TV station ran a segment on the murders. A neighbor described hearing a crash just before dawn. The reporter mentioned signs of forced entry, a struggle, and extensive violence. Claire had been found in the hallway. Mason in the kitchen. Both had suffered blunt force trauma. No valuables were taken. There were no suspects. No leads. Eden didn't smile. She didn't need to. 3 days later, the police made an arrest. Callum Bright had been caught during a traffic stop just outside Gary, Indiana. A warrant check revealed he was wanted in connection with an old weapons charge. Inside his vehicle? A crowbar with traces of blood, latex gloves, and a phone with recent GPS searches matching the Reed residence. DNA from the crime scene matched his. He didn't talk. Not once. Not during the arrest. Not during interrogation. Not even at his arraignment. The DA called it an open and shut case. A former criminal with a long rap sheet, an old grudge, and no known accomplices. Motive? Robbery. Possibly retaliation. They would never know for sure. And that was the point. Eden had never met Callum under her real name. No messages. No digital contact. Just one folder, delivered by hand. No fingerprints. No texts. No trails. The orchestrator remained invisible. In the weeks that followed, Eden resumed her life as quietly as she'd planned it. She kept her head down. Attended parole meetings. Took a part-time job at a thrift store. Read bedtime stories to Noah. Answered June's questions with patience. The world turned. The headlines faded. But one evening, while flipping channels, she caught a brief report on the trial. Callum Bright, now facing life without parole, had chosen not to testify in his own defense. He sat motionless as the jury read the verdict, guilty. Eden turned off the TV. Walked to the sink. Washed the dinner plates. It was over. At least on the surface. By the time Callum Bright's trial began, the public had largely moved on. The story had all the makings of a grim, fleeting headline, a convicted felon with a violent past accused of a brutal double homicide in a wealthy suburb. The victims? A rising entrepreneur and his wife, both described as community-minded and private. Their 5-year-old daughter now lived with Claire's sister out of state. But Eden watched every step of the proceedings like a quiet observer behind glass. The prosecution painted Callum as a time bomb who had finally gone off. They brought in evidence of past assaults, debt collection gone wrong, and his long-standing resentment toward Mason Reed, though they couldn't quite explain how Callum had known where Mason was living under a new identity. Still, the facts were damning. The blood on the crowbar matched Mason's DNA. The gloves had fibers that matched the Reed household rug. His phone had been within a mile of the house on the morning of the murders. Callum's defense attorney tried to argue mental decline, suggesting long-term trauma and substance abuse had distorted his sense of reality. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when the evidence was this tight. Not when the crime was this personal. The trial lasted only 5 days. On the 6th, the verdict came back, guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. Your actions were calculated, brutal, and unforgivable. You took 2 lives and traumatized a child, for what? Revenge? Greed? Pride? Whatever your reason, you will have the rest of your life to sit with it behind bars. Callum stared ahead, expression blank. No appeals were filed. And as quickly as it had begun, the case was closed. But not everyone was satisfied. Whispers started, small, quiet ones, from reporters, online sleuths, and armchair detectives who had seen too many documentaries and crime shows to take things at face value. How did a man like Callum find Mason Reed after all these years? Why were there no security footage recordings the night of the murders, despite the house having visible cameras? Why were the victims' financial records wiped clean weeks before the crime? And who had deleted Mason's old email accounts shortly after the killings? Theories swirled. Reddit threads speculated about a ghost accomplice or an ex-partner with motive. But nothing stuck. There was no evidence. No trail. And Eden made sure of that. She never reached out to Callum again. Never contacted anyone involved. She burned the original manila folder in June's fireplace and scattered the ashes in the garden. She lived her life simply. Quietly. Safely. She took Noah to school. She cooked dinners with June. She saved every penny she earned and worked toward regaining full custody. In the eyes of the state, Eden Hall was a model parolee, a woman who had done her time and returned home to rebuild her life. And in the eyes of the world? She was invisible. Just how she wanted it. By the following spring, the house on Elmwood Street began to feel like home again. The walls no longer echoed with silence. There was laughter now, Noah's, mostly, and the smell of breakfast drifting from the kitchen each morning. Eden planted herbs on the back porch. June knitted by the window in the evenings, occasionally glancing up at the boy racing toy cars across the floor. The storm had passed. At least, on the surface. Eden's parole officer filed glowing reports. Her job at the thrift store was steady, if humble. She enrolled in online classes again, working toward a degree in social work, a carefully chosen field, one that aligned with a future she'd carefully crafted. Most importantly, she filed for shared custody. The hearings were cautious but favorable. June supported her. The court-appointed advocate acknowledged her efforts. The therapist assigned to Noah praised the gradual, consistent reintroduction of his mother into his daily life. It wasn't instant. Noah still called her Eden sometimes. He still flinched when the doorbell rang at night. But one evening, after brushing his teeth, he padded barefoot down the hallway and asked, "Can I sleep in your room?" She nodded. He crawled into the narrow bed beside her, wrapped himself in her arm, and whispered, "I like it better when you're here." She didn't cry. She just held him close and stared at the ceiling, the quiet hum of the house surrounding them. It was the first night she'd truly slept in years. Outside that small world, the name Eden Hall was a ghost, a brief line in the court documents from 2018, a woman once charged, once imprisoned, now free and forgettable. No one connected her to the brutal murders in Indianapolis. The media had moved on. Mason and Claire were footnotes in a long list of crimes committed and resolved. And Callum Bright? Now serving 2 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security prison, refusing interviews, letters, or appeals. He never mentioned her name. Even under pressure. Even when pressed about how he found Mason. Whether it was loyalty or pride, Eden would never know. Nor did she care. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require recognition. It just ends the story for the people who hurt you. And lets you write your own. Eden kept her life small. Focused. The thrift store promoted her to assistant manager. She started leading workshops for women re-entering the workforce after incarceration. She began volunteering at the local halfway house, helping others find housing and jobs. Quiet work. Honest work. But beneath it all, the steel in her spine never softened. She had learned what people were capable of, what she was capable of. Not with fists or knives or blood, but with patience and planning. Eden Hall's story ends not with sirens or headlines, but with the rustle of a child's backpack and the soft creak of porch steps underfoot. Each morning, she kissed Noah's forehead before school and packed him a lunch, peanut butter, no jelly, just the way he liked it. She watered the basil on the windowsill and checked the mail. Bills, flyers, nothing more. To the outside world, she was a quiet woman rebuilding her life after a mistake. A mother, a daughter, a neighbor. But under the calm routine, a question lingered, not just in Eden's mind, but in the air around her, unspoken. Did she get justice? Or did she get away with something far worse? In her journal, hidden deep in a shoebox beneath her bed, was a single page she read more often than she cared to admit. It was a photocopy of that first letter Mason had sent her from across state lines. The one that arrived after her arrest. The one where he mentioned Claire. The one where he signed off with no apology. No remorse. Just arrogance. That page had started it all. And now it was just paper. Faded ink. Evidence of a man who believed he'd always be one step ahead. He wasn't. And as for Claire, the friend who smiled in Eden's face while lying next to the man who betrayed her, she had chosen her side. She had laughed, posted pictures, planned baby showers, all while Eden sat behind bars. Some might say Eden orchestrated murder. Others would argue she handed fate a nudge. But the truth is more complicated. She didn't commit the act. She didn't touch a weapon. She never stepped foot near the crime scene. What she did was plant seeds, and let them grow in someone else's soil. A debt collector with a grudge. A home without surveillance. A schedule revealed. And silence. Flawless, deliberate silence. Years passed. Noah thrived. He started playing soccer. Made friends. Called Eden Mom without hesitation. He never asked much about his father, only once, quietly, in the dark of a thunderstorm. Was he a good man? Eden had paused. Then answered truthfully. He was someone I needed to forget. And Noah didn't ask again. The question of guilt remained, not for the courts, not for detectives, but for us, the observers. Was Eden a victim who found justice by her own means? Or was she a perpetrator who escaped punishment? We want our stories to fit cleanly into categories, hero and villain, crime and consequence. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, the villain wears a suit. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a gavel. And sometimes, the woman you least suspect is the one who watched everything fall, and never lifted a finger to stop it. She just made sure the match was left near the fire.